Welcome everybody to this briefing with the General Moshe Bogi Alon. He's a retired Lieutenant General, former Chief of the General Staff of the IDF, former Minister of Defense, a distinguished visiting fellow at the Washington Institute, where he authored the study Lessons from the Palestinian War Against Israel. Also, he's running a hedge fund together with Abu Dhabi, promoting collaboration between Israel and the Emirates. General Alon, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Uri, for having me, and thanks to the Jerusalem Press Club, and thanks to everybody who is now participating in this briefing.
Okay, so let's start with the short introduction, then we move to questions and answers.
Yes, I would like to start by saying that Israel is engaged today in another wave of terrorism. It's not new. There are certain specific characteristics to this wave, but we are used to deal and to be challenged by terrorism even before the creation of the state. In the 20th century, massacre in Jerusalem or in Hebron, and of course the incident, the Great Arab Rebellion, as well as the reaction to the UN partition plan of 29th of November 47. And personally, I was engaged in dealing with terrorism during the Intifada. I served as a commander of the Judea and Samaria division from 92 to 93 until August 93, a month before Oslo, and then dealing with it as head of the intelligence under late Mr. Rabin, the terror attacks at that time, and of course later on as a deputy chief of staff and chief of staff after serving as the OC of Central Command, dealing with the Palestinian terrorism. September 2000, the Al-Aqsa Intifada, as they call it, and then defensive shield operation, dealing with the terror as the chief of general staff, and as a defense minister, the stabbing attacks of the end of 2015. In a way, the current attacks are more similar to what we call the stabbing attacks of 2015, not organized by terror organizations, but based on especially incitement. That was the case in 2015. We learned it. It's a formidable challenge for the intelligence and the units, because you don't have the ability to know what's going on in the head of someone who is incited, whether he's incited by the social media, incited by the imam in the mosque, incited by Yahya Sinwar's speech or whatever. He decides to go and to kill Jews, to murder Jews, whether it is with weapon, with knife, or with axe, as we witnessed recently in Elad. What we can say in this wave of violence, like in earlier wave of violence, that the Temple Mount is a good excuse to incite Palestinians. It was in the time of Sheikh Amin al-Husseini. Arafat used it, September 2000, using the Sharon visit to the Temple Mount, and all the propaganda regarding the Al-Aqsa is under danger because the Israelis want to destroy it or to take over it or whatever. It's very easy to incite Muslims using these slogans, and this is the case now, using Ramadan, and we witnessed 2 attacks for the first time in Israel, perpetrated by ISIS followers, Daesh as we call it. That was the beginning in Beersheba, and in Hadera, perpetrated by Israeli Arabs, motivated by the ISIS ideology, and unfortunately they succeeded, and there is an inspiration when they succeed to murder Jews. So the entire attacks were perpetrated by Fatah followers, Hamas followers, Palestinian Islamic Jihad followers. It doesn't matter. Incitement is taking over everybody. The decision to go outside and to kill Jews in the head, and this is very difficult to deal with. In 2015, we have found some ways to try to track it in the social media. I believe that it is done today, and we hear about many operations in certain areas to arrest those who intend to perpetrate terror attacks. Of course, we have arrested more than 600 Palestinians from Judea and Samaria in the last month and a half. And every night we hear about more operations, especially now in the area of Jenin, which usually, even before defensive shield operation, was the most challenging area because of certain reasons. Part of it is the lack of rule of the Palestinian Authority. And we try to manage by foiling intentions of terror attacks, in one hand, using the big stick, as we call it, on the other hand, to allow the entire population to work, not to impose closures as we were forced to do during our Independence Day, but we have lifted it because we believe that the way to deal with it is to deal with the terrorists, potential terrorists, to allow the entire population to live in dignity, to enjoy well-being, to be employed as we do today. There is a dispute about the Temple Mount, although it is very clear that there is a status quo achieved in 1967 and was signed by the government of Israel and the Hashemite Kingdom in 1994 in the peace accord with Jordan, in which the Hashemite Kingdom is recognized as responsible to the mosques in the Temple Mount using the Jordanian Waqf, and Israel is responsible for overall security and has the authority to deal with all the compounds regarding security if there is no need to enter to the Temple Mount because everything is in peace and quiet. You can't find policemen storming the mosque, of course, but when certain elements exploiting the freedom of prayer for violence, then you can see the Israeli police. There is a lot of propaganda regarding it, which mobilize not just Palestinians, also Muslims from the region and from the entire world. And we insist to keep the status quo. And I hope that the discussion between the Israeli government today and King Abdullah of Jordan will settle it in the very near future. What we have proved as well, that there is no way to escape the Israeli security apparatus. Any terror attack which was executed after defensive shield operation, we succeed in arresting the terrorists in a couple of hours, in a couple of days, or even if it is more difficult, a couple of weeks, not more than that. And that was the last case, a devastating attack in Elad. After 62 hours, the terrorists were arrested. This is a result of our intelligence dominance after defensive shield. We didn't enjoy this intelligence dominance because we weren't allowed to operate in Area A. And nowadays, if we have any piece of information about terrorists in Jenin, in Nablus, or in Ramallah, although it is Area A, we enjoy the freedom of operation to deal with it. Part of the situation is a weakness of the Palestinian Authority. Abu Mazen, of course, is happy that we are doing the job. Even today, we do most of the job in foiling terror attacks, in dealing with Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and ISIS in his areas of responsibility, areas A, and these security apparatus are doing part of the job. And of course, we cooperate actually dealing with common enemies. So I'm not sure when and in which way this wave is going to be concluded, but I'm sure that at the end of the day, like in former wave of terror, we succeeded in eliminating the terror and calming the situation for a while until the next wave of terror. This is our wave of life since the dawn of Zionism, and I believe that it will be sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you. We received several questions already. I'm sure more will follow soon. So let's start with the hot issue on the table. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, following his call to Palestinians, including Israeli Arabs, to pick up a knife and slaughter Israelis, something which has unfortunately actually happened, there were calls to eliminate him from the scene. What is your opinion on this matter?
My opinion is that Yahya Sinwar meets all the criteria of targeting killing operation. He is a ticking bomb. If he incites for more violence, he's a ticking bomb. And he deserves it. But the decision what to do with him, when, how, it's up of certain considerations. We can look back to the past in which certain terrorists were eliminated from the arena, and it was very beneficial. And in other cases, it was not so beneficial. So the dilemma, I believe it is now on the table in the Israeli government with the recommendations of the security organizations, the IDF, the ISA, and so forth. And at the end, I believe that they'll make the right decision how to deal with this terrorist, which was released actually in the Shalita deal, going back to the this discussion about releasing terrorists. So I believe it is discussed now in the Israeli government, and let's wait and see to the outcome.
Your remark already generated another question, which is, according to many sources, you were involved in the elimination of Abu Jihad in Tunisia back in '88. In hindsight, was it worthwhile, or did Israel get worse people replacing him?
I believe that it was beneficial. The assassination of Abu Jihad. We have other examples of very beneficial operations, whether Israel took responsibility or not, like Imad Murania. Hezbollah hasn't succeeded him till now. In the beginning, they tried to succeed him by 4 figures, 4 terrorists, but they failed. Fathi Shkaki was a very beneficial operation of 1995. His successor, Ramadan Shalach, didn't have the terror capabilities, operation capabilities that he had, the experience. But on the other hand, we can mention Hassan Nasrallah replacing Abbas Musawi. It was not so beneficial. So I believe that when it is discussed, there are many considerations to be taken into account, and I believe it is done today in the Israeli government.
Sinwar is trying to connect Gaza with the West Bank with the hope that the West Bank perhaps becomes some kind of a advanced post. harassing Israel through terrorism without necessarily involving Gaza. How should Israel respond to this?
That's right, what you said, Uri. We can see that Hamas leadership trying to avoid now any conflict vis-a-vis Gaza, which is relatively new. You know, after Protective Edge operation, we enjoyed peace and tranquility for more than 3.5 years. For March 2018, the situation had been deteriorated. And with this government dealing with the situation in the right way, to my mind, not giving them money in cash, but using stick and carrots as well regarding the population, the policies that I mentioned earlier, they succeeded to calm situation regarding the Gaza Strip. But the Hamas leadership is trying to operate and to deploy terrorists from Judea and Samaria, as well from the Israeli Arabs or inside them. We should hold Hamas leadership in Gaza responsible, as well Hamas leadership abroad. They used to operate from Turkey as an example, from Istanbul. Hamas terror headquarters moved from Damascus to Istanbul. We should hold them responsible. So I believe that, again, it is discussed by the Israeli government and the professionals what to do with this kind of policy. In one hand, to keep Gaza out of the conflict, but to use other elements from Judea, Samaria, and Israeli Arabs as well to incite them to operate against them.
The problem is that between military operations, the Israeli governments have been soft, relatively soft on the Hamas and harsh on the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. Perhaps this policy should change.
I can't say that we are soft on the Hamas. You know,
the Qatari money, etc.
The Qatari money allow the public sector in Gaza to function. But in this case, it's not in cash today. I criticize the way that Netanyahu's government allowed the cash money in suitcase to be delivered to Hamas. The way that we did it before, and we do it now, is delivering the money to the personal account in the post office bank in Gaza, and each doctor, teacher, clerk, or whatever from the public sector in a list that is checked by Israel, not to allow terrorists to be paid by Qatar. This is the way it is worked. Of course, we allow Qatar coordinating with us the reconstruction as well, or to allow the oil for the power station or for the fuel stations. It is inspected by us, it's also coordinated by us. That's fine. Regarding the Palestinian Authority, we are not harsher, but yes, we have certain demands from Abu Mazen, like not paying salaries to terrorists and their families, according to the amount of blood that they succeeded in bleeding Jews. If you are arrested for 3 years, you will get 400 shekels, 4,000 shekels per month. And if you are arrested after, of course, being indicted in the court for more than 30 years, you get 12,000 shekels a month. This is the case. We haven't solved it, and we have to solve it. It is impossible. You know, I heard that the EU is warning the Palestinian Authority because of the contents of the education curricula. I claim it from '95. When I realized, serving as head of the intelligence under late Mr. Rabin, I said there is no way to reach peace if you educate the young generation, 3 years old to to wear explosive belts. To kill whom? If you use anti-Semitic motifs in the textbooks or in the TV programs for kids, you're not going to reach peace, reconciliation. From the very beginning, I told our allies from Europe, from the United States, you have to condition the financial support to the Palestinian Authority by demanding from them to stop this incitement in the education system. Hopefully it will happen now, I'm not sure.
As you said, there are new, or at least unusual actors in this wave of terrorism. Israeli Arabs, Bedouin, some of them expressing linkage to ISIS. How does this, how could this change Israel's response?
Generally speaking, and looking at it in retrospect, the trend among the Israeli Arabs, to include the Bedouins, is to be integrated in the Israeli society, to benefit from the Israel's democracy, from the prosperous economy, and they want to be integrated. There are certain elements, not too many, regarding terror, although when we witnessed the riots a year ago, it was more than a few elements, because as well they are incited. But generally speaking, you can meet them in the hospitals, as doctors, as the nurses, whatever, in the pharmacies, in the high tech. And my way is to encourage them to be integrated, even to serve national service, because it's very sensitive to demand them to serve in the IDF, although certain of them are ready to volunteer. I paid condolences visits to Israeli Arab Muslim families who lost their sons in the battle against Hamas in Gaza. I'm not talking about Christians, and I'm not talking about Druze, of course, or Cherkess, or have to serve as mandatory service. So my way is to encourage them to be integrated. In this regard, I would like to mention Mansour Abbas. He is a Muslim. He is a leader of a certain part of the Islamic movement in Israel. And he says that he knows that he lives in a Jewish state, and he's ready to be part of the coalition. But he wants, of course, to serve his people. They suffer from the proliferation of arms, from protection, from the gangs, from lack of governance and law enforcement and so forth. So the Israeli government had to do what we try to do, and I was part of it when I served as a minister in the Netanyahu government, to come out with a long-run plan in which we are going to solve the problem of the land. You know, if you don't have master plans, how can you build legally? Then, of course, to spend money on infrastructure, education, employment, and then law enforcement. That is my way. We approved actually in 2011, 5 years plan in the Netanyahu government. It hasn't been implemented yet. And that's the way to deal with it. It's not just by law enforcement, but to address all the other challenges regarding the Arab sector in Israel. This is the only way that I can find as useful.
You asked to focus on the security issues rather than political ones, but the two are really connected with each other. And there's a question about can a government which probably lives on a borrowed time deal effectively with this, or will this wave of violence accelerate the fall of the cabinet?
In many cases, especially in politics, it's a matter of alternatives. I don't want to go in depth to the Israeli politics, but it is well known that I was very critical to the government that I resigned from. Netanyahu government, I left it in 2016. It was not because of disputes regarding what should be done with Iran or with Hezbollah or Hamas. It was because of what I witnessed firsthand after the election of 2015. And this is the most dangerous, even existential threat for the state of Israel, the internal issues. How to keep Israel as democracy, not to allow anybody, to include the prime minister, to be above the law. Of course, it's not right or left regarding security. It's about being corrupt or being honest. It's about telling the truth or lying or manipulating the people. Incitement against each other. You know, in any case, we should be unified. This is our history, especially when we are threatened. So to incite against each other, it is very dangerous, and this is the case. So I claim that the current government is doing well, although there is a political terror against certain elements. One of them surrendered and left the coalition. But I called yesterday on Twitter the government to hold, to keep. The alternative is very dangerous to our future. And I hope that they will do it. And they're doing well. Yes, they come with reforms, with plans, and even regarding security, they are doing better.
So much for not talking politics. Okay. The war between the wars against Iran is going on mainly in Syria, but also elsewhere. How do you assess the effectiveness of this battle?
No doubt that the Iranian regime, I'm not saying Iran, the Iranian regime is the main generator and instigator for instability in the Middle East. It's not just against us. Lebanon has been abducted. A decision to wage a war against us by Hezbollah is not going to be made in Beirut. It's going to be made in Tehran. And on behalf, and the Lebanese are going to pay the price. Yemen is an example. The Houthis, Hezbollah, likewise element, proxy, challenging Saudi Arabia from its backyard, and not allowing Yemen any stability. Iraq, even North Africa, challenging Morocco from the Sahara by Iranian proxies. And of course, close to us in Syria. There are some information that Russians are reducing the capacity of the troops. Who is coming instead of them? Iran. Now, we decided not to allow threatening presence of Shia militias. Most of them are not Iranians. The commanders are Iranians. Iranians are not ready to sacrifice. They are ready to sacrifice Shias from Pakistan, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, for money. But to see them deploying close to our border, we don't allow it. This is a campaign between, or the operations between the wars, not to allow them. And of course, not to allow the rearming of Hezbollah and other elements with certain threatening weapons and ammunition. And it is an ongoing operation. It's not a secret, in which we try to eliminate those capabilities to reduce the threat for the state of Israel from Syrian soil. And I believe in the current situation, we'll have to enhance it.
Of course, the Iranian deal is still on the table. Should Israel pursue its policy of opposing the deal, or at least changing its terms, or should Israel accept the deal as a lesser evil? Because as you said, it's all a matter of alternatives.
The question is, if will be a deal, which deal it will be? The contents are very important. I'm a strong believer that we are still able. It doesn't mean just Israel. I so to believe the United States from the very beginning should lead the camp, the coalition, which will allow the Iranian regime to have a military nuclear capability. And twice in history, the same Supreme Leader Khamenei decided to suspend the project, to suspend certain elements of the project. It was in 2003, after the Operation Iraqi Freedom, when two rogue leaders in the region were afraid from the third phase of the US offensive after 9/11. The first phase was, of course, in Afghanistan, the second in Iraq, and Muammar Gaddafi of Libya and Khamenei of Iran asked themselves who might be targeted next. Muammar Gaddafi decided to give up his military nuclear project without a single shot. And Khamenei suspended the project for a year and a half until 2005, when he realized that the US administration at the time of Bush has lost its political stomach, let's put it this way. Now in 2012, in the time of Obama administration, a good policy strategy consists of political isolation of the regime, crippling economic sanctions, and credible military option, whether it is an Israeli or American, in which the regime was afraid of, brought Khamenei to the table to be engaged with the great Satan, with America, 2012. Unfortunately, the way that the administration managed or mismanaged the negotiations brought about the deal of 2015, which was very bad. We believe that more, significantly more, could be achieved at that time. Nevertheless, in the Trump era, the decision to withdraw from the deal without Plan B was disastrous. It broke the coalition, the P5+1, and some more elements from Europe, or those who were ready to be part of the sanctions regime against the regime, the Iranian regime. Nevertheless, with Biden today, we understand the ideas, the limits. We have the channels today to discuss it between the Israeli Prime Minister and the US President, between the security and defense establishments, open channels, which wasn't the case in the time of Obama. And hopefully we'll be able to convince the administration not to make mistakes, like the idea to take off the Revolutionary Guard or the Quds Force from the terror list. So far, so good. But I don't want to go to too many details, because I still worry very much from the American way. But as we have open channels, we have the way to convince and to put the right things on the table. But at the end of the day, we say in Hebrew, if I'm not to myself, who will be for me? Israel should be able to defend itself by itself.
Last question before we let you go. With your rich military experience, would you mind giving us your assessment of the war in Ukraine? What's going on there?
From the moral point of view, it's very clear who is the aggressor and who is the victim. Very clear. From a strategic point of view, I believe that all of us can be impressed how spirit and moral is important. The Ukrainians with less military capabilities are fighting for their cause, for their life. And the Russians have to use Chechens, Wagner, force, and the regular soldiers are not so enthusiastic to fight for what? I'm not surprised from the failures of certain Russian weaponry systems. We have the experience in dealing with Russian weaponry systems in the past, but even today in Syria. But at the end of the day, I would like to go back to the moral point of view. A tyrannical regime, a dictator, can do what Vladimir Putin is doing in the 21st century, and the world is supporting Ukraine. But to my mind, it's not enough, according to my values and moral approach to this.
Should Israel do more? Should Israel do more to help Ukraine?
I'm not sure that we are doing our utmost. Yes, we are in a sensitive situation, but I don't believe that our interests in Syria are going to be affected. That's my point of view. I'm not sure that the people in the government share it with me, but this is my opinion about the situation. I met the Russian military attaché in Tel Aviv immediately after we realized that there was a deployment of the Russians in Syria. I'm not sure that it will be contradictory if we will be more critical to this Russian policy in Ukraine, but this is my personal opinion about it. But morally, we should be on the right side of history, and the right side of history is supporting, in this case, Ukraine as a victim.
General Yalon, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and for your candid responses. I'd like to thank my JPC colleagues, Talia Dekel and Eli Klutstein, for facilitating this. Thank you, the journalists who attended, and goodbye. Stay tuned to our next events. Thank you very much, and we would be happy to host you again in the future, General Yalon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.